the way I define it is as a form of deep collaboration. So I come from a collaborative background, and it's not, I think of it as not just collaboration between like two people doing a project together, but more a collaboration where there are a lot of different ways of engage, like projects in which there are a lot of different kinds of engagement, levels of engagement, levels of authorship. Projects that often have a lot of different manifestations is sort of what I mean. And I think that the primary goal of social practice is to sort of promote confidence in the commons, to make a new form of the commons, which is sort of a public sense of the world that is not entirely defined by either the private or the public sector. So it's not defined in those terms. And it's an older... Oh, are you gone?
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay. I think my screen's frozen, but anyway, I'll just keep talking. So, not being defined by the sort of terms that we have to define kind of economies right now, but to think of the world as a common place, common space, common place. So I think that's the kind of primary goal of it. I think it's to kind of help culture gain confidence in that realm. And people do that in tons and tons of different ways. I think also it's a practice that recognizes how stratified the social sphere is and tries often to kind of mess with the stratification or question it or ask questions about it or shift the meaning within it, shift the kinds of things that get put together things which are often considered disparate but very clearly share a world. And I think that it often gets misunderstood as being something like about just sort of making these congenial, friendly experiences. But the part of it that's sort of critical is really this kind of messing with the stratification of social space, the social sphere, where the boundaries of the social are. How do we include sort of plants and animals in the social, questions like that? Where are the boundaries of the social? So that's basically in a nutshell what I think it is.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Usually at this point I ask people to give an example, but you've already referenced such a multiplicity that might be a bit of an erroneous question. Do you want to offer a couple of examples, or shall we just move to the next question?
I think we can move to the next question.
Okay.
There's so many examples. I mean,
right.
I think people have examples, and yeah.
Okay.
So if I remember right, the next one was
the next one concerns the future. Like, how do you see this evolving? Do you?
Well, yeah, that was the one that I had the hardest trouble defining, because I think. I do think that if you are talking about social practice as having to do with artists, which, it's also a category that kind of defies the boundaries of what an artist is. And so there's always this kind of, is it art or not? But I think the future really has to do, in artistic terms, it has to do with artists becoming kind of like bigger players in wider culture and less in a bubble, hopefully. Right, like that's the kind of optimistic notion of what it might be doing in the future. I think that also social practice projects are interesting in the sense. I mean, I'm really curious about the long-term effect of them, because it's not the perspective from which they often get looked at. Often they're looked at, I feel, in a really present sense, a present tense. So like, what happened? What's going on, who was there, kind of thing. Whereas, the kind of trickle out ripple effects of those projects are often, like less looked at because they're harder to quantify. So, I hope that in the future these projects will be seen in a longer time frame. So that's one of the things.
And
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask the next question, but it sounds like you're going into...
No, go ahead.
Okay. So what do you think are the main challenges here?
Sustainability. I think the main challenges for me, because I really am working in an art context, the challenges I see for the practitioners have to do with, how the practitioners can sustain a life doing this, given that the projects, like there's this way in which there's a lot of free labor involved in a lot of these projects, a lot of volunteerism. There's also this sort of, thing where it's still very reliant on kind of institutional support. So how institutional support can happen without somehow clamping down on this notion of the commons, right? Because institutional support is often sort of from the nonprofit sector or the so-called public sector, or it has to be private sector funding. And so, of course, economically, we're still totally in the middle of those two systems. And so, like, I think there's a challenge about sort of how to really bring about this kind of thing of the commons and another sort of sector of economic, like, can we really make new economic models, I guess, is an interesting challenge. I think there's a challenge about legacy, which I think is why there are so many conversations going on like this that have to do with, like, what is social practice? I think there are a lot of competing histories for how it came about. And I also think that it's very possible that the terminology will change in the next 5 years, that, like, the term itself, social practice, in a sense, is part of the problematic nature of this as a field. Yeah.